Thursday's been good so far.
Great.
Could be better.
Alright, so there's my title. Hope you remember my presentation. Okay, so before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and thank 4 people. I'd like to thank Ms. Harper, my senior thesis teacher, for always pushing me to try harder and do better. My faculty advisor, Ms. Manley, for her helpful insight through this entire thesis process. My field advisor, Josh Cohen, for his wide knowledge of memory techniques and his enthusiasm for them. And then last, although it is a little unconventional, I'd like to thank CJ for being a presentation consultant. Okay, so now to get started, let's start off with a question. How many of you have ever wanted to learn a language? Maybe French, Spanish, Japanese, German? Alright, well, what about, have you ever had to give a speech? What about memorize poetry? Alright, so what do all these things have in common? They all involve memorizing. You can call it learning, whatever you want to call it, it's still taking stuff out there and putting it in here. Okay, so in my presentation, I'm going to show you 2 new ways of doing this that date back to ancient Greece that, in my opinion, are both more fun and effective to do this. I hope you leave my presentation knowing a little bit more about how your memory works. Okay, so there's a little teaser about the 2 techniques I'm going to be teaching in this presentation. Okay, so I said memory techniques were effective, right? Now, if they were so effective, then why have they been forgotten? Why don't we know about them now? In order to answer this question, let's delve a little bit into the history of memory techniques. Memory techniques were discovered at a banquet. That's a banquet. By a poet named Simonides. According to legend, he was delivering his poem when he saw 2 friends of his outside beckoning to him, as if it were a matter of grave importance. As soon as he stepped outside to go see his friends, the halls of the banquet collapsed, killing everyone inside. And since the bodies were unrecognizable, Simonides reconstructed the scene in his imagination, and he remembered who had sat where, and thus was able to take by the hand the loved ones of the dead and show them which body was theirs. Out of this tragedy was born memory techniques. The Romans found a use for memory techniques, and that was oratory. The famous Roman orator Cicero loved memory techniques so much that he even wrote a memory treatise about them. Okay, so with the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of feudal kingdoms, speeches weren't so important anymore, because the king told you what to do. So instead, another use for memory techniques was found. This use was books. Back in the medieval times, scholars, if they were lucky, saw the same book once or twice in their lifetime. So they employed memory techniques to memorize entire books. St. Augustine tells of a friend named Simplicius who was able to recite Virgil not only forwards, but backwards. Now, eventually, the church felt that memory techniques were wrong. They felt it was wrong that priests were using lewd and bizarre images to remember their sermons, which were about things that weren't bizarre and, weren't lewd. So, this is the main reason why memory techniques have been shoved under the rug and mostly forgotten, all except for by history professors. Which brings us to the modern day. A couple decades ago, this treatise of Cicero was rediscovered by people who weren't historians. And they found a new use for memory techniques: competitions. This guy right here, he used to be the world memory champion. Right now, he's doing an event where he's trying to see how many decks of cards he can memorize in 1 hour. Now, there's a world memory competition and a US memory competition. They have similar events, memorizing cards, names and faces, poetry, and random strings of numbers. It's pretty much like an SAT for memory. Now, at the beginning of the year, I found out about these memory competitions, and I came across a quote of Ben's. It says, "It's all about technique and understanding how your memory works." And then there's another quote. "It's all down to train the memory. Anybody can do it. You don't have to be some sort of natural-born genius. I'm certainly not." So I thought two things. A, this guy is like the biggest liar on earth. Or B, maybe actually memory techniques are powerful, and regardless, I felt like I should check them out. So, I started my personal journey with memory techniques at the beginning of the year. The first thing I did was I used these techniques to memorize the presidents, their dates in office, and the political parties. I did that in the first quarter, and I still remember them. You can quiz me later if you wish. The second thing I learned how to do is memorize a shuffled pack of cards, memorize the order of them. And I learned how to do this after weeks of practice in 15 minutes. The world record for cards right now is 21 seconds. That guy practices a lot more than me. Okay, the third thing I learned how to do is solve Rubik's Cube blindfolded. And if you're out there during health sometime, you can watch me do it. Okay, so not only telling you this to brag, I'm trying to tell you that, from my own personal experience, I can confirm what Ben said. These techniques indeed are powerful, and if you practice and you understand how your memory works, they will work wonders. Okay, so now before I use these techniques, I use rote memory. And I don't think that I could have used rote memory to do any of these things. First of all, it's because they're ineffective, and second, because they're boring. Now, if I tried to memorize a deck of cards using rote memory, this is what I'd look like. Okay, so the question is, how does our memory work? Like, how come rote memory doesn't work so well, and how come memory techniques work so well? And so, I have the answer for you here today. Glue. Okay, so, psychologists would say it's a memory bias. Memory bias is something that makes it stick in your memory. Your memory has biases against certain things, certain types of information. So if you have a picture, right? We all know a picture speaks 1,000 words. We remember pictures better than words. Our memory is biased. And so if we understand these biases that our memory has, we can utilize these to remember better. So another bias is humor. Remember things that have humor better than those that don't. Okay, there's another effect. It's called the von Rothschild effect. But more simply put, anything that stands out from your ordinary experience of life is going to be remembered easier. And so, sticks out like a sore thumb. It's a good way to remember it. Okay, fourth is emotion. Anything that gets you pumped up, aroused, anything, any kind of emotion is going to help you remember it. The last one is anything that's sensual. So you can provide your own image here. Okay, so how are we going to put this glue in whatever we want to remember so that we actually do in fact remember it? I have two tools here to show you how to do that. Action and substitution. So action is anything that moves. So like flying, swimming, kicking, punching, that's action. Now substitution is putting one thing in place of another. So right here we have a doctor, and his head's been replaced by a giraffe's head. That's substitution. So these are the two tools that we can use to put glue in the stuff we want to remember. So here's a breakdown. We have our glue, right? That's what we need to remember stuff. We have our tools. That's how we put the glue in, right? And now I'm going to explain to you the techniques. That's what we've been waiting for, right? Okay, so the first method. I told you there's going to be two methods. The first one is the keyword method. Remember the key at the beginning? Maybe? Okay, so how do we use this method? Two steps, two easy steps. This is for vocabulary. So if we have a foreign word we want to find an English word that sounds like it. So if we take the French word cheval, for example, which means horse, what is an English word that sounds like cheval? Shovel. Okay, so the next step, we're going to visualize the interaction between the sound-like word and the definition of the foreign word. So we need to visualize the interaction of shovel and horse. We're going to use action, so we're going to think of some action that has some glue in it. So if I'm going to think of, a shovel hitting a rocking horse, that's funny to me. May not be to you. Sounds like it is. So I want to remember this word, so I'm going to take a moment and visualize it. I invite you to do the same if you want to remember this word. So imagine a rocking horse being hit by a shovel. Remember? Okay. Okay. You all got it? Okay, so did it look something like this? Okay, so we're going to do another one, but this time we're going to use substitution. So we have a foreign word. Le choux is French for cabbage. Alright, what's a word that sounds like shoe? You guys are good. So now, second step, we're going to associate shoes with cabbage, right? Okay, so we're using substitution, replacing one thing for another. That's pretty easy, right? We're going to have shoes made out of cabbage, replacing our shoes with cabbage. So, remember the last time that you were looking at your shoes and they looked like cabbage? And remember what they felt like. Well done then, right? Okay, I got it. You guys got it? Okay. Look something like this. These are mine, by the way. Okay, so the last two were concrete definitions for the words that we use. Horse is concrete. You can touch it, smell it, taste it if you want to. And then we have cabbage, right? You can eat that. It's tangible. But here's an English word from one of the senior vocab tests. Punctilio. And it means, as if you can read, a minute detail of conduct or procedure. So, what does punctilio sound like? A punk rock star. Okay, so here's the tricky part. Abstract definitions. What do we do? Okay, I'll tell you. We're going to find something that reminds us of it or symbolizes it in some way. It works for me. Does it work for you guys? A magnifying glass, small detail? With me? Okay. So now, the fun part. We're going to associate magnifying glass with punk using action or substitution to put some glue in there. Okay, so I think we should use action and we can have the magnifying glass hitting the punk rock star over the head. Alright, I'm going to picture that. That's pretty funny. Oh yeah, okay. Did it look something like this? CJ drew this, by the way. Thank you, CJ. Okay, so names and faces, names and faces. Same thing as vocabulary. The name is our foreign word, right? And then we just need to find a sounded-like word that sounds like a name. Okay, so what's a name we want you to remember? Any volunteers? Adriel?
My name.
Too hard.
William.
Stone? Okay, let's do Stone's name. Okay, so what's a sound-like word that sounds like stone? Anybody?
Stone.
That's a good one. Okay, so now we're going to find a facial feature that stands out to us about the person. So, we don't want to be mean to Stone. Just choose one, don't tell him. Okay, and now we're going to visualize the interaction of our sound-alike word with the feature that stands out most. And the hopes is that once we next see Stone, if we only met him for one time, that we're going to remember the feature that stands out, and then because we remember that, we're going to remember our picture, which gives us his name. So I'm going to visualize my interaction. You guys are welcome to as well. Okay, next method. Memory palace. Okay, so when do we use this method? We use it whenever the information that we want to remember is in a sequence. Deck of cards, right? It's in a sequence. I'm going to use the memory palace. Speech, I'm going to use the memory palace. Grocery list, memory palace. Poems in order, memory palace. Books, same thing. Okay, so now how do we actually use this method? So the first step is to kind of find a place that you're very familiar with. Say you're like your childhood home, for example, and you want to imagine like what that place looks like. And then after you kind of remember what it looks like, then you're going to choose an intuitive like route through the house. And each of the rooms is going to hold an image of the information that you want to remember. And so the hope is that by going through in a sequence, in an intuitive order, you're going to thereby, there's this sequence thingy, that thereby you will remember the images in order. And the cool thing about this is you can also walk backwards around your house. So anything that you memorize with this method, you can also know backwards. Any deck of cards that I memorized, I know backwards. I also know the presidents backwards. That's a cool bonus, right? Those Greeks. Okay, so you've heard from the memory champion, former memory champion, heard from me that they work, and they work really good. Now, let's hear from a scientist. Okay, so there's, his name is Richard Atkinson. He's a professor at Stanford. He did an experiment where he took 9 Stanford students that were learning, or going to learn Russian, and he gave them 675 Russian words to memorize over the course of 6 weeks. Half of them, he taught them how to use the keyword method, and he gave them a sound-like word for each Russian word. Whereas the other group, the control group, he just told them, use rote memory, you're on your own. So he tested them after 6 weeks over all the words. And so the retention rates. Okay, the keyword group retained 72%, whereas the control group retained 46%. He decided to surprise them 6 weeks later. He asked them what they remembered. The keyword group remembered 46%, and the control group remembered 28%. So, according to the study, we can see that memory techniques work almost twice as well as rote memory, right? But I'm going to share with you guys a secret. There's a way to get an 100% retention rate. So if you were in this experiment, you could have gotten an 100% retention rate of all the words. I'm going to share the secret with you. It involves exploiting the spacing effect, which is a cognitive memory bias. So basically, the spacing effect is based off of the forgetting curve. So the forgetting curve says that we constantly forget information. And so if we memorize something, once we learn it, we're going to be at 100% retention. The first day, we're going to be at 80 if we don't review it, right? But if we review it, there's some lines here, they go down, but if we don't review it, we're slowly going to go down. In day 3, we're going to forget everything about it. But if we review it, we'll go back up to 100% retention rate after the first review. And then the second curve will be a little bit longer time before we forget it. And so the key to exploiting the spacing effect is like reviewing right before you're about to forget something. So if you do indeed do this and review at the optimum times, you will need, according to this other guy, his name's Pimsleur. He has a PhD in French, and he studied the spacing effect, and he learned about the forgetting curve. So he says you need 12 reviews to put anything in your long-term memory, and these are the intervals that you need. You need to review it after 5 seconds, after 25, after all those intervals, and then after you reviewed them at those times, you'll have it in your long-term memory. Now, in my experience, I found that by using memory techniques, I can skip the first 6 reviews. I can go straight from memorizing something on day 1, and then reviewing it on day 5, 25 days, 4 months, 2 years, and then it's my long-term. So, if you remember with the rote memory, if we repeat something over and over and over and over and over until we remember it, right? That's basically using the spacing effect, except we're not using it effectively. We're putting all our reviews in one short space instead of spacing them out. We remember better when we space out our reviews. Okay, so how can we practically use this information to memorize large amounts of vocabulary? This is where spaced repetition software comes in. There's this program that I use and I like. My field advisor uses it too. for learning large amounts of vocabulary. It's called Anki. Anki is basically a flashcard program that has spaced repetition built in. So, like, if you know the word, you can say, like, okay, I know it, remind me in, like, the next spaced interval, like 5 days, and if I, the next 5, like, interval. And so, the cool thing about this is that you can employ memory techniques and use this. And now, you've heard from me, you've heard from the memory champion, you've heard from the professors at Stanford. Now I want to hear from you. Do you guys remember? Andrew?
Pork.
Matt?
Cabbage. Is sheep.
Jordan?
Seeing small details.
Alright, nice. And what's that guy's name? Okay, so if this presentation at all interested you and you want to know more about memory techniques, here's 2 resources. Mnemotechniques.org is a site built by my field advisor. It has a blog, it has a forum, it has a wiki, and then there's a book called Moonwalking with Einstein. It's an enjoyable read. It's about a reporter who goes to report on a memory competition and then finds out that he really likes memory techniques and they're really cool. So he practices for a year and he goes back and he wins. And this is his story. So, that's it. No questions, I lucked out.
Oh, we remember that.
Arisa?
I have a question about the memory palace. You said like you could use that to memorize a deck of cards, but in a deck of cards there's like a lot of the same, like there's one blue king, there's ace blue king, and then there's like the same 4 symbols. So if you're putting that in like a memory palace, wouldn't that be confusing with the order?
Okay, so here's the thing. Just with the keyword method and all the other methods, the whole trick is we turn whatever we want to remember into an image, because we're going to remember it better, right? And so when I memorize a deck of cards, I don't memorize King of Spades, Queen of Clubs, Ace of Diamonds, because that's really boring, and no one's going to remember that. And if you try to do that, you're going to be like that guy who's hitting his head against the wall. Okay, so I use something, and it's called PAO. It's one of the ways of turning the cards into
Comes out. I have a question about that screensaver. Best part of
Okay, PAO stands for person, action, object. So all of my cards have an individual person, action, and object that I associate with them. So if we take clubs, for me, that's all Harry Potter characters. So we have the King of Clubs. That's Voldemort. His action is disapparating, and his object is a snake. Okay, then we have Queen of Clubs. That's Snape. His action is slapping someone over the head. Okay, and his object is potions. Okay, so Jack of Clubs. That's Harry Potter. His action is sleeping. And then his object is glasses. So if I come across these words in this order, I'm going to always take the person of the first card, the action of the second card, and the object of the third card. So we have Voldemort slapping glasses. And then I put that in my first room. You can put multiple images in rooms once you get kind of good. And that's how I go about memorizing a deck of cards. Sophie?
Can the PAO be used in memorizing something other than a deck of cards? If so, what are some examples?
Okay, so I use these to memorize numbers, and I also use it to memorize the Rubik's Cube. For me, I just turn all the cubelets into numbers, and then King, that's 13, Queen 12, Jacks 11, 10's 10, 9's 9, 8's 8, 7's 7, 6's 6. And there's different ways of turning numbers into pictures. Like, I use a different system to turn the numbers into pictures for the presidents. Rachel?
My question is, you talked about the treatise of Cicero on memory, kind of kicking off this whole competition aspect. What was contained? Was the technique contained? Was the poem contained?
Okay,
What was that
so
treatise?
the treatise, it really describes the memory palace method and how to use it. And it gives some like old Roman examples. So like one of those examples was if you're in court and someone says that someone got murdered, that was the case, by poison, and there was a witness, you could turn that into an image by having ram testicles like in the guy's hands, and he's laying on the sickbed dead. And the ram testicles, it reminds him of the Latin word testes, which means witness. And so it's just like weird examples like that, and it's how to use the memory palace. And he says, I'm sure like everyone around Rome knows about this, and I'm wasting ink describing it. Adriel?
So once you use these techniques, you remember every sequence of cards that you've ever seen, or like every sequence?
So, memory techniques aren't that powerful. So if you remember the forgetting curve, whenever I remember a deck of cards, I'm going to remember it for the entire day, forwards and backwards. Now, after the first day, I'm going to start to forget some of them, but not all of them. And by the second or third day, I will have forgotten all of them. So I need to have multiple memory palaces if I want to memorize every day.
So if you use the, sorry, this is like a attached question.
Yeah.
So if you use the forgetting curve, do you plan the use of the forgetting curve as well? Like, do you plan to not have to have these card sequences, memorized
Yeah,
for
I mean,
your whole life?
I don't really want to remember a card sequence for the rest of my life. It's not really useful. So after I remember a deck of cards, I don't think about it for 3 days. And I use a different memory palace if I want to continue memorizing decks of cards. But like if for vocabulary, I want to like memorize it long term, then I make sure I get my reviews in. Mally?
So like for the presidency order, do you have one memory palace that's the presidents all live there and nobody else goes in there basically?
Yeah, because that would be an example of one where I wanted to remember the information long term. So I never use that memory palace for anything else except for the presidents. Rachel?
And this seems like a great method. Why isn't more people know about it?
Well, I mean, not many people know about it. It's this weird subculture of people who like to do memory competitions and just enjoy it for funsies. And like, we get by with like rote memory with our tests and stuff, right? So I mean, although it'd be really useful for us for studying, we'd have a lot more free time, like, we don't really need it as much as the people who needed it to like memorize books, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't have that information at all.
So, could you give us like an example of using it for like a grocery list?
Okay, so the first thing I did to try out memory techniques to see if it really worked was a grocery list. And so I had a 10-room house, and for some strange reason, like, I don't know, maybe I reviewed it too much by accident, I remembered the whole list for like a really long time. And so like for a grocery list, like what I would do is I'd take each grocery list item and then kind of do something ridiculous with it in each room. So like, I had like a banana for my first one, and it was on the couch, and it was just like humongous banana on the couch. The second one was like a piece of butter like melting on the bed, a giant stick of butter. And the third one was like cracked eggshells like all over my room floor, and I was, that would be an example of it. Rachel?
Do you find that you have like a limited amount of room in your head for memory palaces, or do you find that you can like just keep adding them?
Okay, well, I feel like I could just keep adding them, but see, it does take a little bit of effort to make a new one. I have to think of a place that I've been to, like say the school, and then kind of like go through it once to, break it in. And then, I mean, it doesn't take that long, but you can make as many memory palaces as you want. Sophie?
So each memory palace is a different place?
Yeah. So yeah, the school's one place for me. It has 17 rooms, and I memorized like lots of decks of cards in here.
So there's also the PEG system. Have you played with that at all? And if you're aware of it, is that basically like a memory palace that can be coded in such a way that it can hold multiple pieces of information?
Okay, so the PEG system, for those of you who don't know, is a way of remembering things out of order. So, like with the keyword method, we don't even need to take order into account. With the memory palace, we concentrate on sequences, right? But what the PEG does is, if you give me the number 5, I'm going to tell you what's associated with 5, or 10, right? So it'd be useful for like, maybe like the presidents, knowing them out of order. I unfortunately do not know the presidents out of order. I haven't played with the PEG system. I just haven't gotten down to it, and I haven't like seen a use for it other than like the presidents.
Well, I know, because there's one system, I think it's the master system or something, that I know a lot of the hardcore memory people use, and they already have generated most of the images and controls, and it has to do with like switching numbers to sounds, and then the sounds combine, so you can still memorize things in order, but you're converting basically in your mind a number sequence into sound sequence, which you convert to a word, which then is programmed as an image. And if you do it enough, apparently, you can memorize like ridiculously long things in order with pegs. I haven't delved that deep into it, but I know like an N stands for 2 because it has 2 downstrokes, and I've just kind of put it around, but I just didn't know if you had played around with that at all. It seems like somewhat complicated, but it seems like once you have it set and gelled in your brain, you can do stupidly ridiculous things with it.
Well, from what I've learned about memory techniques, in the memory competitions, the number 1 method they use is the memory palace. They use that for almost everything except for names and faces, which they use the keyword method for. And also what I've learned is that the visual is the best sense to memorize something with. It's the most remembered. And so like, I think sounds can be useful. Like I think the audible memory is very strong as well, but not as strong as the visual. And I haven't really played around with that, so I can't tell you more.
Does your field toggle like this?
I think he's muted. Is he?
Hello?
Maybe he's taking a nap.
Did you
Can
hear
you hear
my question?
Sorry, it was breaking up a little bit.
I was just inquiring a bit about the PEG system. I know there's like a memory system. It's called the master system or something along those lines, where they're converting like numbers into sounds, and then the sounds into words, into images, or something like that. Are you familiar with that at all? Is that something that people use much, or is that not as effective as some of the other things? Do you even know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, the major system,
Yeah,
that's basically the technique that I use, but I haven't experimented with pegs that much because it takes more time to create the pegs than it does to create the memory palaces. But I have used it for JavaScript programming. I'm studying that right now.
so can you briefly like explain the major system, like in
I can do that
30
if you want.
seconds or something? Or
Sure.
Or he
So
can.
every digit, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 would be turned into a consonant. So 0 would be Z or S, 1 would be T or D, 2 would be N, 3 would be M, and then you would create words based on those consonants. And then you would use the same kind of visual association. So for me, 05 is Salvador Dali, and then I would attach whatever I'm trying to memorize to him. But there's actually an easier way to do it where you can create pegs but not use the major system, use an alphabet system. So you would take all the letters from A to Z and then create maybe an animal based on the letters. So my system is ant, bee, cat, dog, elephant, and it goes all the way to Z. And then I attach I'm studying programming, so I attach the things that I'm memorizing to the animals. The animals are interacting with the images.
what is there a name for that system?
I would call it alphabet pegs. Or it's basically a peg system, just using alphabets instead of digits.
Thank you.
Lawrence?
Sure.
I have a question. You said visual is like the most effective way, and that's how people remember best. But does it not vary on like, I guess, what kind of learner you are? Because some people learn better like, with auditory, like listening to things more than seeing, or kinesthetically. So does like the technique that works best for you vary based on your learning style?
In my experience, no. I mean, I haven't really looked into studies on that, but I know from my personal experience that anything visual I remember much better than anything else. And I've taught like a few other kids how to like memorize decks of cards and like play around with memory techniques. And everyone that I've taught it to is like as good at it as I am, which leads me to believe that, you know, for everyone, like the visual sense is strongest, and it just makes sense to me. We're all human. Audrey?
I had one question, because as a musician, I often have to memorize music, and usually my system is just kind of like, I know how this piece sounds, so like I know what the sequence is in terms of my playing it. Recently I've started at like a 25-minute long piece, and so I was wondering what memory techniques of the ones you talked about, or ones that you know, would you think of like applying to like memorizing a musical piece?
Okay, so it sounds like for all the memory techniques, we need to turn the information that we want to remember into something visual. So that's a given, but it sounds like you want to do this in sequence. You have a sequence, right? So I would tell you to use the memory palace method, right? The way you go about converting the notes and the different symbols into images is like totally up to you. I mean, I can help you brainstorm some ideas if you like later. Ms. Sutton?
This is an aside, but the thought I had when we first finished was, are you going to go into consulting? Because I can see a real opportunity.
Thank you.
And would like to be able to hire you. But I am curious, I'm fascinated with Cicero trees, and but I'd also like to know were there other written sources that are more current, more research based? How much did you rely on your mentor? Was it hard to find him? So addressing your sources, however much you find.
Okay, so about the treatise, that's the only surviving treatise that explains how memory techniques work from ancient Greece. And then about my field advisor, so in researching more about memory techniques, I came across his website, and when I asked him to be my field advisor, he said yes, and from that point on, he's been very helpful.
So really, you haven't looked at other sources on memorization, brain research, that kind of stuff?
I tried to stray away from the science and instead take like a experimental personal approach. Ms. Harper?
So you had us all imagine something for stone, and I really wanted to hear what people have imagined. So I'm saving my question for last. If other people have questions, please ask them. But I thought it would be really neat if some people said what their
As long as it's not me.
imagined. Well, yes. Thank you for saying that.
I imagined his hair. I imagined his jacket was like gray and like a stone.
I imagined a rock with very nicely curved eyebrows.
Yeah, same thing. I imagined a rock with a cartoon. It's like the head of a rock.
Rachel?
I did like pebbles just like pouring out of his mouth.
I imagined him wearing like earrings, because his ears are notable for me. And they were like really big rocks, and then they started falling down.
Michelle?
I just had like another question. Like, I don't, like personally when I'm trying to memorize stuff, I usually think of like base colors and patterns and stuff. In past experience and add like music to it or something in my head to remember stuff. Is that like a certain pattern, or is that just like another road?
Okay, well, although visual is like probably the best thing to use to memorize stuff, if you can incorporate other senses, you're probably going to remember it better. Because you're basically tricking yourself into having had that experience. And so, although I myself am not very good at visualizing color, if you can do that, then go for it, because that'll help you remember it better. Dowling?
Yeah, and I do know like when they say like you're making your imageries, like the more senses that you can involve generally, the it's good for helping with wooing. You know, so if you can do multiple, like the texture of something in your visualization along with the sound and smell and stuff, like the more you can fully incorporate sensory apparatus, I know that a lot of people feel that's pretty useful for that kind of stuff.
There were like 3 routines I've like rehearsed in my head before but never actually done it, so then when I actually did it, I felt like I'd done it a billion times. So it was kind of weird, I was just curious.
Daniel?
Yeah, the guy you mentioned earlier, like the world memory like championships. Do you know if like the guys who they memorize 50 decks of cards or just ridiculous numbers like that, if they use these exact same techniques, or do they have just more advanced systems like the PEG system, or do they use complex memory palaces?
So everyone in the World Memory Competition uses the same technique, the memory palace, right? The way they go about turning their images into, their information into images, they go about it in different ways. And so, like, a lot of people use the PAO, other people use different, like, systems for turning their information into images. Now, the key thing with, like, why these guys are so good is they practice a lot. So, like, I think the world record for one deck of cards is 21 seconds. And then in 1 week of practice, I got to 15 minutes, which I think is, like, pretty decent. Didn't keep it up, though. Rachel?
I know this method is extremely useful for people with dyslexia, just because it's able to take an object and put it into an image, and that's, I have a teacher and she talks to me about the memory thing, and it's actually really, really useful. So I know that's one thing for learning disabilities is like great.
Are we feeling done?